Welcome to the tutorial, Adjusting the Velocity. So let's go over some of the stuff that we learned in the previous two tutorials. So we've mostly been dealing with two different position types. The separate position type that we see with the birds. And I'm actually going to bring up the layer properties here instead of having to double click every time and opening a new window. So here we see that they're separate, and when you have separate positions there is no velocity. And this is in opposition to the camera, whose peg position is set to 3D, where there is in fact a velocity. So if we go back to the birds, and I'm actually going to keep the trajectory in view at all times, we can define its velocity through changing the curve of its position paths. So what we did is that we created a Bezier curve for its x position. And let's bring it up here. And by changing this curve, we've essentially changed the velocity so that it actually goes slowly on the way down and then it swoops across and goes very quickly. And if we hit the play button, I can show you what I mean. So the camera is still on, so let's just turn that off. And so you're going from slow to quick. So I think I may have misled you in one of the previous tutorials where I said that the birds go faster when these lines are together. In fact, they go slower because they're going through all of these frames in the same length of time, because if you look at this graph, it's divided in the first half being the first 20 frames, the second half being the second 20 frames, but it has to cover a lot less ground in this time than it does in the next 20 frames. The birds are going to go very slowly for the first 20 frames because there's less ground to cover, and then much faster because there's more ground to cover. And you can see the acceleration because as you spread out, it's going faster and faster and faster and faster. And it gives it sort of a nice swoop. It's like hovering and then swooping across. So not to flog a dead horse, but one more way that you can look at this graph is that if you look at the first 20 frames again and you match it against the function value, which is the scale on this side, you'll see that the birds have gone from roughly what looks like 1 to, at frame 20, 2.5. And I'm guessing this is 2.5 because it's exactly between 0 and 5. However, for the second set of 20 frames, the birds have gone from a function value of roughly 2.5 to what appears to be about 18. So clearly it's gone very little the first 20 frames, and it's gone much farther in the next 20 frames. So in that way you can measure back and forth that the greater you make the distance in a shorter amount of time, the faster the birds will go, and the shorter the distance you make in the same amount of time, the slower the birds will go. So that's one way of defining velocity for separate positions. But now let's take a look at 3D positions of the camera. So first I'm just going to hide all controls so that the bird trajectory will not stay in view. And then I'm going to turn on the camera, and we're going to take a look at the camera's values. So the camera, which has a 3D path for its position set, does have this velocity option, and we can bring that up here by going to camera-p path velo, and we can now play with the camera's velocity. So I'm going to do that, and in that I'm going to show you all the features that exist in the function panel for the velocity. And just to remind you what the trajectory looks like for the camera, let's go to the top view and let's select the camera. Actually, I'm going to keep it in view at all times. And so you see it's like this zigzaggy sort of S curve that we have going. And just to actually show you as well in the camera view, let's hit play so you can see what that looks like. If we go back to the function editor, I just realized for the velocity I can't show you how to use the reset because it has a maximum value of 1. So let's choose the X position for the camera. So this is the X position, and if you grab, let's say, the last keyframe and you pull it upwards, like that, for example, because this is positioning, it's being pushed really, really far right. But what I wanted to show you is that if you click on this Reset View button, what it does is it'll include the entire graph in this little view. So now you can see everything from the bottom of the graph to the top of the graph. So that's why this is useful. And then if I want to undo that, I can zoom in, sort of center this, and then hit reset again, and it'll sort of reset it to the way it was before. So it's basically just to always have your curve visible, your complete curve in this frame. So let's go back to the velocity. And using the next button, if you remember, you can add a keyframe. So I'm going to click that. I'm also going to keep show current frame. And then obviously you can make that a stop motion keyframe, which, as you see, got rid of that smooth interpolation, that gradual movement. So it'll be, if we play in the camera view, you'll see it'll go for a bit and then it'll jump, and that's obviously what a stop motion keyframe does. So let's undo that. And what we have here in this drop-down list, I'll get back to these steps right here, is we have the ability to change the way these Bezier handles work. And we know that we're using a Bezier curve because if you look in this title bar which says editing, it says camera P, so camera peg, path, velocity editor, Bezier. And it's also obvious because of the handles that we're using. So I was having a little bit of difficulty in one of the previous tutorials because I expected these handles to move together and they didn't. They're moving independently, but that's because we have corners selected here. So if I select this keyframe and choose straight instead, you can now move the handles together, or if they hit a certain point you can move them independently, and you can also shorten them and lengthen them independently like that. But then if I want a total controlled smooth curve with no kinks in it that you can create like that, that's a little bit of a weird curve, what I can do is I can select the keyframe again and choose smooth. And so smooth gives you an absolute smooth curve. Like that, no matter what. So it sort of regulates it for you. So it looks like corner has the most freedom, but also the greatest chance of making a strange looking ease curve. Whereas smooth has the least freedom, but it gives you the best looking smooth curve and everything that follows suit in between. And actually, let's take a look at what this looks like through the camera view. And if we look at the top view, we can have a better idea. So it looks like it goes quite fast through these first few frames. It slows down in the middle, and then it becomes fast again. And if we look at the function, we can see why that is. So we can see that it speeds up, plateaus here in the middle, and then speeds up again. And so that's what we're seeing in terms of the velocity relative to the graph. So let's undo that. And now what I want to show you is how to use this steps button. So let's click on that. And so this is called the hold value editor. You can choose your first frame, so your start frame, so we'll say frame 1, your stop frame, which let's choose frame 60 so you can see it all through the velocity, and then the number of steps that you want. And what that actually means is the number of holds you want per frame. So we want to hold every step of this velocity for 2 frames. Let's say apply. So as you see here, it looks like a little staircase. I'm going to close, and I'll show you what that looks like in the camera view. So you can tell it's a bit halting as it's moving through that S curve. I think it looks about the same in terms of its velocity. So this is something that you often do in animation where you want holds for multiple frames, and you can do that through the velocity editor. You can do it for any curve where this function button exists. So let's undo that as well. So I'm going to show you the next 2 buttons through the bird's X position. So if we go there and we select the middle keyframe, if you click on this first button here, what it does is it flattens out the segment between it and the next keyframe. So what it's essentially doing is it's turning itself into a stop motion keyframe. So let's undo that. And then if you click on the second button, what it does is it converts the curve into a linear segment. So you can try that out for yourself in the software and then see what kind of effect that has in the camera view. So the next thing I'd like to show you is how to adjust an ease curve. Up until this point, we've only used Bezier curves. So to do this, let's take a look at the punching bag. So I'm going to turn off the camera actually so that it'll come into focus right here. You can select it in the camera view and then find it in the timeline. So I'm going to uncollapse its peg and select it. So the main movement from the punching bag appears to be its angle Z rotation. And once again, the Z axis is what's coming out of your screen towards you or receding into space, and it's obviously rotating around that point. So this is the curve that I believe we'd like to see. So you can click on angle Z here, and I might need to select it from the list here. So punching bag peg, angle Z is what we'd like to see. And there we go. So what we'd like to do is to turn this into an ease curve. So we have to put back in all the keyframes that we see listed here on the curve. So there has to be one here, and then as we scroll across, there's one right here, one right here, and there. Okay, let's see what that does in the menu. So obviously 1 isn't enough. We have to bring this up much higher. So let's go to something like 5. And bring this into view and hit play. So we can see slowly by slowly it's going in one direction, and then what we have to really do is bring it into the other direction. Something like this. So you can see it's starting to swing back and forth a little bit. These values have to be even greater still, I believe. So let's go all the way up to something like 15. That's it. So now we have the full swing out. Let's take this somewhere like 12. So you can see it's starting to get its swing. And what we're playing with here with the ease and out is a perfect linear segment capped by 2 semicircular segments like this. And if you grab onto one of these half circles or full circles, if you grab onto the yellow handle, you can rotate one side of the curve or the other. Like that. But it forces it into this sort of ease in, ease out position where it slowly comes in, speeds up, and then eases out. And so if that's the type of motion you want, then this is the best type of curve to use. And generally you would use this type of motion for things that are quite mechanical, such as the wheels of a car, something like that. That's a very constant back and forth. And because here we know it's back and forth until it comes to an end, the distance of the swing is not even but the fact that it's swinging back and forth is very much a mechanical movement. So this is a possibility for that type of a curve. So it would end up being something similar to this, but probably needs refinement still. Like that. So you get the picture, but you can keep fooling around as much as you want. So the next thing I'd like to show you is how to apply ease on multiple keyframes. And for this, I'm going to hide the punching bag, but I'm going to bring into view the karate rabbit. It's a faster way of doing it. Okay, so we have a keyframe here already. Let's go to keyframe 20 with our animate mode on and our transform tool selected. Grab the arm, let's go up one here, and let's rotate this out slightly. And then let's rotate this entire arm out as well. And the hand as well. Something like that. It looks like it's a stop motion keyframe and I'm not sure why. Oh, it looks like these are stop motion keyframes. So let's click Shift, so let's collapse the entire master peg, click on this, say set motion keyframe, and same with this one, click set motion keyframe. So now these have arrows there. And now if we play, we have that interpolation in between. So that's all I really want. Now if I want to set an easing on this motion, what I can do is I can select all of these keyframes, I can right click and select the menu item set ease for multiple parameters. So then this dialog box opens, set ease for multiple parameters, and in the first window here I can choose if I want to set the ease on the motion, the rotation, the scale, the skew, all of those options, or just a few, so you can pick whatever you want. For example, I'll just leave it on for everything for now. Then you can play with the curve here. It has Bezier handles, so you can decide if you want it to slowly go in and move out, you know, or the vice versa. You can decide on what you want your curve to look like, and as you can see, the values are adjusting right here. So you can apply that and then close. So let's collapse this again and take a look at what that looks like. So you can see it comes out fast and slows into its movement. So that's just one way of creating a sort of an easing for multiple parts. And because these parts move together, it might make sense to have them ease and ease, to ease out and ease in a similar manner. But just one word of warning here. A lot of times if there are several keyframes along a row, so say there's another keyframe here, then some people believe that if you select a group like this and apply multiple easing, it'll apply to all the keyframes in this row. In fact, it only applies easing on this column. I believe that that's why there was that apply next button or apply previous, because it'll probably jump back and forth between the keyframes. So I'm going to undo that and undo all of that. And let's just collapse this again. The last thing I want to show you is how to play with velo-based curves. But before we do that, I'm going to modify the path of the camera peg. So from the top view, we see that it's like an S, but from the side view, it's still very flat, as it is in the camera view. So just to be a little playful, let's grab one of the control points and pull it downwards, and then grab the other control point and pull it upwards. So now not only is our camera zigzagging across the plane, but it's also moving down and then up and then down again. And let's take a look at what that looks like in the camera view. So it's a little crazy there. So on top of that, if we wanted to then add a camera rotation on the Z-axis, what we could do is we could make this a velo-based curve. So once again, if we click on that little black arrow, we can select Create Velo-Based. And what we're going to do is actually change the velocity of the camera and then change the angle of the camera. And what the angle will then do is follow the velocity of the 3D path. So from our Functions menu, from this drop down, let's choose Camera Path Velocity. And let's just reshape this into anything, just to see the difference in the top view. So we can see here it goes very, very slowly and then it speeds up. Actually, I think I'd like it to do the opposite. I'd like to go really fast and then slow down as it comes towards the door. So let's make this look like the opposite. It'll go fast, it'll slow down close to the end. Like that. And let's test that in the camera view. And it comes to a stop like that. So now let's take a look at the camera angle. The angle is here, and it's also right here. So let's take a look. So right now it's empty, and that's because there is no rotation on the Z-axis. So let's add a couple keyframes. Let's say at frame 10, be 20, 30, and 40, and maybe 50 again, just for good measure. And then at these keyframes, if you pull them upwards, you'll notice a very strong tilt. So it's a very obvious and strong tilt. And then you can force it back again, because as it comes back this way, and then you can have it tilt the other way. So I'm making it very dramatic, so it's very obvious what's going on here. So something like that. So let's play that to see what happens. So it's a pretty dramatic camera tilt. Goes all the way one way, all the way the other way, and then comes back to even. But what's actually going on that we are more interested in, more than that, so let's just close that, is that because we made this angle Z a velo-based curve, then what it is it's basing its rotation also on the velocity of the 3D path. And the reason that you would do this, and you often do this with rotation and scale, is that as the camera is rotating, if the path is either accelerating or deaccelerating, you want the rotation of the camera to match. You want it to slow in and slow out as it's rotating, so it doesn't look like it's rotating quickly, but that you're slowing down, etc. You want it to match the velocity of the path. And that's the same for the scaling. If you're going from big to small, you want it to gradually go from big to small with the same way that the path is accelerating or deaccelerating. You don't want to quickly go from big to small and then your camera slowing down. So that's usually why you do something like that. So that's pretty much it for the tutorial adjusting the velocity, and in fact it's the last video in the video series Animation Paths Part 2.